Did you expect Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio to be so intense? This adaptation hits you hard from the beginning. So, without further ado, let's discuss all the details that made this version far darker than Disney's.
Somebody understood how dark it felt to be a child.
Number 1. This is not Disney's Geppetto.
We wanted Geppetto to be really full of edges.
The 1940 animated movie depicts Geppetto as a lonely puppet maker who simply makes Pinocchio as a companion. But Guillermo del Toro fills in a backstory that is so much darker.
What is this? What kind of sorcery?
Here, we find out that he had a real flesh and blood son before Pinocchio, but that his passing turned Geppetto to drink. One night, in a blind rage, he carves Pinocchio out of the pine tree that grew over his son's grave, before waking up hungover with no idea what he'd done. Guillermo del Toro explained that his backstory touches on what the movie is ultimately about, which is the relationship between flawed fathers and flawed sons.
Either you make the movie the right way, or it's almost as good not to make it.
Number 2. If you've seen the movie, you know the setting plays a huge role. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio takes place in 1930s Italy during the rise of fascism, though, as he pointed out,
which all happens, by the way, on the periphery or off screen.
Guillermo del Toro has said,
"If I can avoid it, I refuse to have a proper war scene."
But added that in the making of this movie, he felt that
the dynamics of the ghostly, corrosive parental power that fascism exerts over certain souls, it needs to be there.
Guillermo del Toro especially wanted to explore this theme through the characters of Podesta and his son, whose relationship has become strained by Podesta's military career and high expectations.
Now, you will know what it is to truly serve the fatherland.
Number 3. Have you noticed the similarities between Pinocchio and Frankenstein? Guillermo del Toro has. As he pointed out, both stories are about a father who creates a son sort of in a haphazard manner, before sending him into the world without any real assistance, adding,
"And I felt like that as a kid."
But that isn't the only parallel. When it came to the moment where Geppetto puts Pinocchio together, Guillermo del Toro has said,
"We wanted to make the scene almost feel like Frankenstein's lab."
All of the thunder and lightning, as well as the harsh movements like branches breaking, are meant to evoke an almost Frankenstein-like feel, which Guillermo del Toro felt added to the sense of trauma about the birth.
It's me! I came to church!
It's a demon!
Number 4. How would you respond to finding this in your attic? Pinocchio isn't entirely in control of his body when he's first brought to life. So, when Geppetto first meets him, Pinocchio moves in such a way that
he looks like a spider.
Pinocchio's design is generally much darker in Guillermo del Toro's version than it was in the original Disney movie, taking plenty of inspiration from the illustrations of Chris Grimley for the 2002 reprint of Carlo Collodi's novel, The Adventures of Pinocchio. Guillermo del Toro felt that Chris Grimley's illustrations embodies an unruliness and an elemental nature, before going on to say, it's really the key to the whole thing.
It's okay to be a monster. We are all monsters at the end of the day.
Number 5. How well do you remember Disney's version of the Blue Fairy? There, the Blue Fairy had a very sweet and almost Snow White-like design about her. In Guillermo del Toro's version, however, Pinocchio is brought to life by a Wood Sprite instead, who looks a little different. When discussing where he got his inspiration, del Toro added that
death and life on Pinocchio look like Mexican carvings.
He explains that plenty of colonial paintings depict archangels and seraphim with multiple eyes across the wings, and that legend has it that one eye closes every time a soul passes. Number 6. How shocking was it to see Pinocchio die for the first time? Pinocchio visits the underworld and speaks with death several times throughout the film.
You cannot truly die.
Guillermo del Toro has said that he intended for death to serve as the most motherly figure in Pinocchio's life, pointing out that there's something very nurturing in the way that death slowly guides Pinocchio toward making the right decision. Del Toro went on to explain that he sees a certain beauty in the idea of death, especially as he gets older.
It's beautiful because if something doesn't end, it never begun.
Number 7. This movie doesn't include the most frightening moment from the Disney version.
Help! Help! Somebody help!
And yet, what it replaces it with is so much darker. Instead of being taken to Pleasure Island, Guillermo del Toro's version sees Pinocchio recruited into the village military camp because the fascist official in the town thinks if this puppet cannot die,
And you will be the perfect soldier.
fun and games have been replaced with drills and paintball. And rather than being turned into donkeys, these children are being turned into soldiers. Guillermo del Toro admitted in an interview with Vanity Fair that all this is very intense, but explained, "For me, this is for both children and adults that talk to each other. It tackles very deep ideas about what makes us human." Number 8. The song is a far cry from When You Wish Upon a Star.
I thought it would be interesting to start the movie with characters that sing.
Much of the music for Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio was performed using wind instruments for more chilling effect, but by far the most haunting song would have to be Ciao Papa, performed by Gregory Mann. Del Toro described it as both the most moving song in the film and the most important song, before going on to explain that it talks about longing, it talks about the loss of a father and the loss of a son. Composer Alexander Desplat spoke about how he wanted Ciao Papa to stand out as its own unique moment, stating, "I think the lyrics say everything." Number 9. Pinocchio's relationship with Geppetto is a bit more complicated this time. Guillermo del Toro described Geppetto by saying, "He's a father that's very concerned with the way everybody looks at him, and how Pinocchio makes him look."
No, please. It's a puppet.
This, combined with Pinocchio's more unruly behavior, means that there's a lot more conflict between them than there was in the Disney animated classic.
You tell him I love him, and I won't be a burden anymore.
But also, over the course of the story,
The one that learns to listen in this Pinocchio is this guy.
Guillermo del Toro says that this time around,
Geppetto learns to be a real father, as opposed to Pinocchio learning to be a real boy.
Number 10. This theme of fathers and sons appears in ways you may not have noticed. One scene in Guillermo del Toro's version has Pinocchio being forced to perform for Benito Mussolini, which ends with the puppet publicly insulting him. When asked why he chose to include this scene, del Toro went on to explain how he wanted to explore the theme of fathers and sons in multiple ways, and that Mussolini represents a more harmful version of fatherhood. On the other hand, the film also includes references to God and Jesus, with Pinocchio playing the role of
Surrogate, imperfect Messiah, resurrecting and dying for those that he loves.
Number 11. There's value in Disobedience. Although Guillermo del Toro grew up loving Walt Disney's version of Pinocchio, he admitted that there was one part of the movie that always bugged him.
Idea of obedience and being something you're not in order to be accepted.
He admitted that one of his own personal challenges when he set out to write the film was to see, can I make a Pinocchio that celebrates disobedience? Because of this, breaking the rules actually comes in handy a few times throughout the film, like when Pinocchio has to escape from the belly of the terrible dogfish by lying. Number 12. Beware the terrible dogfish. If you think you know the story of Pinocchio being that he eventually finds Geppetto in the belly of a giant whale, that was actually a change made for the Disney version. For Guillermo del Toro's version,
I'm going back to the original book.
and bringing back the terrible dogfish. Carlo Collodi's novel described the beast as being larger than a 5-story building. What are your thoughts on this darker adaptation of Pinocchio? Do you think they were an improvement, or do you still prefer the Disney version? Make sure to let us know down in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Things.